Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Spectrum Gaming Podcast. This episode is What is Autism? We've got 4 amazing young people here to join us today to give their perspective. And our starter question is, how would you sum up autism in one sentence? Arkaiid, are you okay to go first?
Sure, that works for me. So, how would you sum up autism in one sentence? Oh, I keep forgetting to just use my regular accent. I would say it's a different way of thinking. This is 2 sentences, but it's one or the other. It's a different way of thinking. It's a brain type.
Yeah. Cool. And next we've got Ethan. How would you sum up autism?
I mean, it can be a bit dumb at times when you've got a whole friend group when you're friends with neurotypicals, because some things get lost in translation, but most of the time it's okay.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So Ollie, what about you? How would you sum up what autism is?
In the simplest terms, I'd say it's sort of a change in perception of the world around you and the interaction with the world around you.
Yeah, cool. And Skully, what about you?
Just how your brain works. Your brain works a little bit different than others.
Yeah, cool. So with this episode, we've actually had quite a lot of the young people from Spectrum Gaming share their thoughts on all of the things we're talking about today. So I'll tell you what a few people have said. And it'll be interesting to see what everyone thinks of this. So Archie said autism is a disorder. We'll come on to that later. Because a lot of people don't see autism as a disorder, but he says autism is a disorder that may give you lack of mental control and motor skills. General Kenobi says something that makes someone different and often enables them to do things which others can't, which is a very interesting perspective. Jamie said a chaotic cluster of brilliance, creativity, and of course social anxiety. I thought that was quite a good response.
Something that might be really useful in an autistic society could be detrimental in a society that's not built for us.
Yeah, 100%.
Which it basically isn't. It never was, and it never has. It never was, and it never. It probably will be at some point, but it never was.
I think we'll be talking about that later as well. The final thing someone said on this topic, after Birdo, said a mental disability, but also a superpower that causes people to think differently. It can be difficult to live with, or live with someone who is autistic, but there are certainly a number of positives that come from it. I think that was also quite an interesting perspective.
Again, it can be quite difficult to live with. Maybe not in an autistic creative environment, but in an environment that is made for people who are very different from us. It can be very harmful.
Yeah. I think that's an important point. One of the questions which everyone was asked about is what the negatives of autism are, and it was interesting because most of the things which people said, so General Kenobi said being treated as if you can't function. Coolest person says they struggle with making friends or going to social events because they find it too noisy. Aaron said that he struggles with bullying. Ruben said he has to do his autistic stuff in a separate room because otherwise people will think I'm weird. But all of these points, if you think about it, they're not actually negatives of autism. That's other people's lack of understanding and judgment of autistic people, which made them negatives rather than autism itself being a bad thing, if that makes sense. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think what the thing is, when you're in like a mainstream school, it's like I go to a mainstream school, I'm in mainstream classes, I'm in mainstream breaks and lunch. But before this whole thing happened, I did used to go to lunch early, because queues and crowds are too loud. And then but then the thing was, people just constantly asked why I go early. So sometimes I had to explain, oh, it's because I'm autistic. Why? And then it can be hard when you've got friends sometimes, because you've not got that right social knowledge. So then you think that people actually have changed, but they haven't. and then that just constantly repeats itself.
So in an ideal world, what do you think could be done differently in that environment to make it better for you as an autistic person, do you think?
I mean, I think maybe if at the moment it's okay because we go at staggered lunches, staggered breaks, but breaks are annoying, and staggered home times. I think we actually do need to do a proper lesson in, say, Learning for Life about autism, because I was supposed to be helping with that, because I did suggest doing that, but we haven't done that yet.
And last question.
I'd agree completely.
Yeah, go on, Ollie.
I was going to say, I agree completely with that. I think I've never received any kind of education to do with any kind of hidden disabilities or many disabilities at all, for that matter. And I think I could have understood more about myself if I'd known about autism and things like that from a young age.
Yeah, definitely. Cool, thank you. Arkaiid, I've got another question for you, if that's okay. As I'm looking back at what people from Spectrum Gaming said, and it's interesting. So, you know, I've been on autism training courses, and a lot of people have, but they always sort of describe the same approach of supporting autistic people, which is using really simple, easy to understand language and making sure you're really clear with what you're saying. But most of the responses people said is they hate it when you're treated differently. Or, for example, Archie said he gets treated a lot differently when people find out he's autistic, and Vex said sometimes people talk to him in a really patronising way. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on the way autism's taught?
I've had even like personal experience. One of my best friend's neighbours, like we are really good friends, and then like I just learned about my autism diagnosis, and then I just stopped hearing from him. And yeah, like again, I've been really outwards in my approach. I don't let people think I'm less. I'm pretty. If anybody tries to treat me as less or that kind of thing, I immediately just start trying to talk them out of that. Sometimes it doesn't work. Like I've had an instance in a shop. They're just like, oh yes, another one of these people, but. Just one of those crazy people, something like that. But that was quite a few years ago. Yeah, I've been. I think that's definitely something that happens a lot, which is sad because that should be happening a lot. The thing that could help with all those is just more autistic world. Like we are basically, well, not basically, but we are mentally two different creatures entirely. Not entirely. We share language, but we're so different that it's almost like the difference between say a dog and a horse or something. So maybe we are the same physically, but mentally we're so different. We're not less, we're not more. Well, actually, there's one thing that I was going to bring up later that I think might have a good place here. Something that can't be done is an autistic, like we can't see the difference between, like an autistic doesn't know it's different between them and neurotypical, and they don't know what being neurotypical's like. Neither thing with the neurotypical, they don't know what being an autistic's like, because that's just how we are, that's how we live, that's how our mind works. It's not like, oh, we're autistic now, we know what it was like before we were autistic and after. But no, it's a way of thinking. We're born like this. This is our mind. This is how our mind works.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
We can't clearly define the difference between neurotypical and autistic. The only thing that's for sure is that autistics are very marginalized by neurotypicals. We're maybe all along we haven't quite been a minority, but I think a lot of, like, I think we're still a minority, not to like a full degree, but I think there's a lot of autistics who don't know they're autistic, and who think like neurotypicals, not mentally, but they just think that's how everyone else thinks, and they've just learned to, again, do things the neurotypical way. Maybe life will be harder for them. Life might be much harder, but they won't know who they truly are. And in fact, a lot of the people who really might be autistic and don't know they're autistic might be even more harmful to autistics, trying to find ways to cure them and such.
Yeah, cool, thank you. I think it's Dr. Damien Milton, who's also autistic himself, who talks about the double empathy problem. Because people always say that it's autistic people who don't have empathy, but the people say it's more that it works two ways. So a lot of autistic people struggle to understand people who are neurotypical, but also a lot of neurotypical people struggle to understand autistic people. But the interesting thing, for example, in the UK we have the Equality Act, so by law, people must make adjustments to put support in place for autistic people, but often it feels like it is the other way around. For example, when people have said that people are talked down to, or they're being bullied, or they're not treated the way that they'd like to be treated, it feels like even though the onus should be on other people to treat you better, it doesn't always feel like that's the way it works. So, Skully, coming to you next, do you have any negatives of autism that you want to share, or any difficulties you feel you face?
Being bullied about having autism.
Yeah.
That's it, really.
What was that, sorry?
Just being bullied.
Oh, bully, sorry, I missed it. Yeah, sorry about that. It must be quite frustrating. Yeah. So, Ollie, have you got anything else to share about the sort of negatives of autism?
Yeah, I'd say one big thing is like motor skills can often be underdeveloped, and you can be like depth perception and things like that can be sort of, you can struggle with that. And then there's also the lack of cognitive empathy that a lot of autistic people have, that forces them to overthink and often be like stopped from making choices because they have to think about the social consequences very consciously, whereas to neurotypical people that comes very naturally, and they can sort of understand what's going to happen socially after they do certain things, whereas with an autistic person you don't have that cognitive empathy, and you don't have that ability to sort of understand what's going to happen depending on what you do in a certain situation.
Yeah, cool, thank you. So I think while the sort of general consensus we have is that most of the difficulties faced by autistic people are caused by the environment or other people, but there are a few things people have mentioned which are autism itself, which I find a bit more difficult. For example, MCI said sometimes he finds it really hard to sort of control his impulses and when he tries to do certain things. Someone else, it's slightly unrelated, but they said they have a lot of physical tics, which occur more, even though they're separate from autism. There's a higher co-occurrence of tics and Tourette's and things like that in autistic people. And people may have noticed me always winking my eye throughout the whole podcast. That's a tic which I have. And yeah, I hate it, but there's nothing you can do about it. So yeah.
I think a lot of, mind if I say something here?
Yeah.
I think a lot of those tics, why they're so much more common autistic, this is a theory I have, that it's actually still, again, it goes back to environment related, stress related.
Yeah, well, I don't know, it's because, for example, if you look at Tourette's, that isn't something that's caused by environmental factors. It's more of a sort of a genetic thing, and it is seen as part of neurodiversity. But again, I don't know. For me, I've always had tics since I was really, really young, and they change over time. The ones which I have, I used to have a big neck twitch and that sort of stuff, but I don't think it is stress related. I think it's just, again, it's related to having sort of different brain wiring, and that results in tics, I guess. But yeah,
maybe. But then again, it might also be like, again, there might be like a high co-occurrence because maybe because of that. But another reason is that some, like not all of it, of course, but some of it, or could be stress related. But again, with some people, it might just be like the same rate as neurotypicals, but there could be another one which looks exactly the same but stress related.
Yeah.
For autistics, right? So there's no way to tell.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And Ollie, were you going to say something on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think with things like Tourette's and things like that, you have a sort of genetic disposition to them, but they can often come about later in life because of stress and traumatic events, whereas things like autism and ADHD and things like that, you just either have or you don't from the very moment you're born. It depends on your genetics, but then there are some that also rely on environmental issues.
Yeah. Thank you. So we've looked at the negatives of autism. How about some of the positives? Does anyone want to go first with anything to share? Go on, Ethan.
So the best thing is, I mean, it's a double thing. So basically, usually when with autism, you're kind of a bit smarter, aren't you? Yeah. Well, you usually get put in higher sets. So I'm either in set 1s, 2s, or 3s. But then coming with that is more homework and then more stress and higher papers, and it's just annoying. But then also the special interest thing's also quite good because it means you're super focused on something and you don't stop looking into it until maybe that period of time's over, and then you go on to your next interest. I think before my most recent one, which is Nerf, I did have one in, I can't remember, but I had one in, I think it was on, I've had one on Crash Bandicoot, I've had one on Oddworld, but I can't remember what the last one was. But it usually does change, and it usually gives you a lot of hyper-focus into that, which then, if you find people that also like that same thing, then you know what you're doing there.
In fact, that might be like a good icebreaker thing for, say, like entrance to spectrum learning. That could be a good like icebreaker thing. My thing for quite a while has been tech. That's my special interest. I think that's been like that for a few years.
Yeah, cool. So in terms of special interest, a lot of neurotypical people might not know much about what it is and what it feels like. I know, for example, for me, I have random ones that appear every few months. Like, for example, I had my famous one in 2018, which was Peter Pan, where for 3 months straight, I watched every film on repeat, ordered every single book, listened to a Peter Pan song on repeat all day, every day. And there was nothing else that... It's weird because you get so much joy on that special interest that a lot of people who don't have special interest might not be able to experience. Do any of you want to describe a bit about what it feels like when you have that sort of interest in something? No?
Well, it's kind of in the middle sometimes, because depending on what it is, it can either get you made fun of or help you find friends. There's a very special one you've had, isn't there, Andy? There's like the base foundations of the entirety of SG, which is Shrek. That's like the one special interest that's literally not even allowed to be talked badly about.
Yeah.
But then
I really like Shrek.
Yeah, it can.
I should not have said that family around.
At least it can sometimes bring comedy into things, because sometimes people have been muted for disrespecting him.
It's true. Yep. I've seen people be muted by that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the problem with special interest, well, it's sort of a problem. Sometimes it's a problem, sometimes it's not, is you have absolutely no say in what the special interests are. So what I didn't mention is, after my Peter Pan special interest, my next one was Nicki Minaj. So I was obsessed with her music and listened to every song and learned every lyric off by heart. Now I don't have that special interest anymore, and I am glad, because I really, really, really dislike Nicki Minaj. But it's but if it's something you're not, you know, you have no control over it, so it could be a bit frustrating if it's something that, I don't know, yeah, you don't like it, but you can't stop thinking about it.
I saw you listening to it yesterday, Andy.
No, you did not. Sure.
Yeah.
Tyler, one of your interests like Jack Starvin.
You're not supposed to tell everyone, Matt.
Andy's been called out.
Right. So Ethan, Arcade said, hasn't one of your special interests been Jack Stauber, the musician?
Yes, it has. There was one point back in the summer holidays where me and Art were playing Gmod, and then Jack actually uploaded for the first time in 4 months, in 2 days, and I literally screamed. I actually screamed,
I remember
didn't I? It's
Yes,
like
I remember
we were playing Gmod, we were like making cars or something, and then
You were really disappointed. You were really disappointed by that one.
yeah, because I thought it was an already done song, but he'd made a music video for it like 2 years later. But yeah, it was a new song. It was just a bit confusing because I just looked at it. I saw that it was an official one because it said Jack Stauber as one word, and it also said it at the end of the title. But it was called Back, but I didn't realize that it was not Bid. So I got a bit disappointed in that. But now I'm like, oh, I know the lyrics off by heart now.
Cool.
Yep.
So thinking about positives of autism then, Skully, I've read it in particular that you want to mention.
Yeah, I think that some people with autism look at stuff differently, like in detail.
Yeah, definitely. I think quite a lot of autistic people describe themselves as sort of logical or like pattern thinkers. So I know for me, one of my strengths at work in particular is I can look at really massive pieces of information or text and easily pick out sort of key themes or gaps in information and things like that. And I think that's a skill that quite a lot of autistic people have, but it isn't that common in neurotypical people. So yeah, I think
That's not something I have, but my thing is I'm a very, very fast reader.
yeah. Cool.
I mean, I can kind of pick out from large texts, but because when you get closer to like exam revision or in high school, you have to do, and when you're doing SATs, you have to read CGP books. They are horrible. They are like multicolored text, Comic Sans, or some sort of older text, and it's like black, blue, red text on like a blue background. It's horrible to read. Like, there was one point where my mum had to tell me just cover it up with a piece of paper and then read because it got that much. It was not very nice.
Ouch, doesn't sound good. So Ollie, what about you? Have you got any positives of autism to share?
Yeah, I'd agree with the sort of being really good in specific skills. Like, for example, because I've sort of spent years studying neurotypical people, I've just sort of, I know emphasis really well. So if I read something written down, I can know exactly how it's meant to be emphasized. And it's sort of like weird little things like that that are kind of useful because I like to do acting and things like that. So I can sort of read from a script quite well. And I think also it does give you a sort of self-awareness that a lot of neurotypical people don't have often because you're constantly like analyzing your own actions, so you can often like be aware when you've it's often difficult for people to admit when they're wrong, but I think with oftentimes with neurodiverse people you can sort of be aware of when you've done something wrong and sort of admit to it rather than sort of try and pretend like you didn't do anything.
Yeah, definitely. That's an interesting point that I actually think I relate to quite a lot because I don't know. I think I spend so much time sort of analysing people to try and work out what they're thinking or feeling or what their intentions are. But I sort of automatically sort of self-reflect and look at myself about how I can improve and what I can do differently over time as well. But yeah, it comes natural to a lot of autistic people where sort of feedback and criticism is a good thing and people really, really appreciate it, whereas sometimes if you give a neurotypical person a bit of feedback or and be a bit honest with your feedback, people can get quite upset or defensive by it. So yeah, I guess that's quite a good positive. If we look at what some other Spectrum Gaming members have said, Rowan said that he thinks it gives him a really independent way of thinking. Tay said you get giant communities of people who understand each other, like Spectrum Gaming. There's a few funny ones. So Archie said that he gets to get fast tracked through the airport. Aaron said you get a discount in stores. I don't know who the other one was, but they said about fast track on rides in theme parks as well. So you might as well have them benefits while they're there, I guess. Other things are, Toy said rare things you can do better than other people. Coolest person said you think more logically than a lot of people do. Afterbirdo said it gives me my logical mind and more rigid, detailed thinking. It allows me to try stuff with less regard to what others think, and if it's something I enjoy, I'm able to pursue it well. Yeah, the final one we've got here is, this is from Ruben. He says, while most people have lots of different interests over the years while they are children, I have always had an interest in trains, one that still stands today and is likely to stay for the foreseeable future. Yeah, I think it's really amazing to have that one thing that you always get joy and happiness out of, no matter what. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Does anyone have
It's almost like a comfort. It's familiar, so you can sort of keep that as a constant. Whereas I think a lot of neurodiverse people do appreciate that kind of familiarity that comes from having a special interest.
Yeah.
That's always going to be there.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that sometimes when things change, that can also be hard to cope with for autistic people. An example of this was when I log on to Discord at some point Tuesday or Monday, and then I just see the entirety of the servers changed. All the roles have been different. The admin is now only 2 people, and one of them doesn't even count because they're the owner. And then there's now mods. I've lost both of my roles, and then like the bots have been moved above us as server developers. I'm like, what happened here?
Yeah.
What did I miss?
To be fair, I do have a reasonable explanation for that. So every month or so, we meet and think about what improvements we can do and how to make the server better. And a lot of people have said there were too many channels and we could improve the layout. So me and Jamie looked at making an updated layout. But of course, as we always do, we never do it on our own. So we put a post out rather than telling everyone and doing a big ping because we always get told off for it. I just put a post in general chat and in server developers chat saying, here's a template server, feel free to join and give your thoughts on what can be improved. You may not have seen it, which is why you may not have joined, but everyone who was involved with that, there was about 10 people and they all knew exactly what updates were coming.
But I was there.
Yeah.
I just didn't see all the other updates because I did suggest a few things.
Yeah.
Like the part how we should I think it was keep the anime channel separate from the art and the music one, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's why it is separate. we're still halfway through. We're still halfway through doing all of the updates. So as soon as it's done, there will be an announcement that explains everything. We've just had lots of feedback, and it's hard to sort of go through it all, but it will be done soon. Anyway, should we get back on topic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So next question for everyone, which I think is quite interesting. And Arkaiid, I'll come to you first if that's okay. Question is, do you see autism as a disability?
That's not quite the easiest thing to answer, but the answer is no.
No.
That's a very that's taking a lot of leaps. There's a long answer to that, and I'm going to say it because this is what this podcast is about.
Cool.
Autism itself, I don't think, is a disability, but what makes it a disability is the environment that we're not meant for. The autistics are that is harmful to autistics. That's the neurotypical environment. I think it would be autistics if they had their environment made for them, made for us. If we had our environment made for us, and we lived in our environment for our day-to-day lives with our system, I think it could be possibly.
Oh, I think your mic's gone off.
Oh, yeah. My finger was sliding on.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
I think it could be. It could be potentially better than the neurotypical system, not just in the autistic way where it works better for us. But I mean, it could possibly be more peaceful without neurotypical capitalism and stuff like that. Yeah. It could be a more peaceful world, but then again, it would just be a lot better for us. I think we could, I think we would probably have way more advantages in our own world. If we had a world made for us, again, it's like us being in a neurotypical world. They would not. They wouldn't maybe find it hard, but they wouldn't succeed as well as we would in our world, and we find it hard in theirs. It's just like oil and water; they don't mix.
True. So I've got another follow-up question. It might be a bit difficult, so feel free to not answer it. So if you had the absolute perfect environment, do you think that would fix every single challenge autistic people face? So one like for me, one of my biggest challenges which I face is sort of, I don't know, I really struggle with the uncertainty of knowing. If there's any uncertainty, I really struggle with it. I always say it's like having a puzzle and you have one piece left in the puzzle and you need to complete it and you can't find the piece anywhere. And this applies to me, where including things like meeting new people. So if I meet a new person, whether they're autistic or not, when I get home after the day, I process everything that's happened during the day and try and work out what they think and feel about me. And for me, I can't imagine that there could ever be a solution to that, if that makes sense. But I don't know. So if you was in a perfect environment, do you think it would fix everything, or do you think it would just be?
It wouldn't fix everything. I think the problem isn't just the environment; it's also the people. Like autistic people and neurotypical people, in my experience, like again, it's different brain types. We can work together, but it's not a perfect match.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So, Skully, I'll come to you next. Do you think autism is a disability?
No.
No. And have you got any reasons for that?
If it was a disability, I think it would mean that we couldn't do things other people could do, but I think we can do everything else other people can do.
Yeah. Cool.
But we do everything that neurotypicals can do. But they can't do everything we can either. Again, it's a difference. It's not a disability. It's not a disability. It's not an advantage. It's a difference.
Yeah. Cool. So you're saying just as autism has its advantages and disadvantages, it's exactly the same for neurotypicals. They have disadvantages we don't have, but they also have advantages we don't have. Do you think that's right?
That's true. Like again, it's not just like it's not just that we have, like, they have advantages that we don't have. It's also this world. Like, again, we're at a disadvantage right now because this is their environment. This is what's made, well, not optimal for them, but you're not going to get perfect, but you're going to get close to. This is what works for them. This is an environment that works for them. It's made for them. It's what they do. This is the environment that they work best in. But, well, if they were in our world, I think we'd have many advantages as well. Just because, again, it's like what works for us the best wouldn't work for them the best. And what works for them the best wouldn't work for us the best.
Yeah. Cool, thank you. So, Ollie, what about you? Do you think autism's a disability or not?
Yeah, I think it is, to be honest. I think you could theorize about potentially having a world where it is designed to advantage autistic people, but the reality is that we are not in that world, and it's unlikely that that kind of thing would ever be possible. So I think in the world that we currently live in, it's definitely a disability. And I think actually a society that is perfect for autistic people might not actually be the best way of society working in general.
I wouldn't say it's the best way. Maybe it's the best way for us, but not for neurotypicals. Same thing. We are disadvantaged, or if you're going to put it that way, disabled in this environment. It's not our world, it's theirs. In our world, and what works for us, it might be way better for us. But again, neurotypicals might not work as well in it.
Cool, thank you. So, Ethan, what are your thoughts? Do you think autism is a disability?
So, this is going to be a bit weird, but I think that part of it could be, so like, you know, more severe autism. It's like really, really severe, so to the point where you can't talk properly or it is way too much for you. But then things like where we are, not as much, because we can still talk, we can still do quite a lot of things that neurotypicals can, but we still do have some challenges, such as the hearing and the smell and sometimes picking things out. But then we could also say that about other things, like depending on how severe the neurodiversity is, the more it could like limit you in life. So like maybe it could weaken your chances of being able to get a good education, maybe getting into a good job that you want, or getting into university, because it's so hard for you to actually do things that it just gets to the point where you can't exactly do anything. But
yeah, cool, thank you. And I've got quite an interesting thought on that. So people have talked about having a sort of world made for autistic people versus a world made for neurotypical people. And I know quite a lot of autistic people who are non-verbal and are seen as severely autistic. But actually, when I meet with them or get to know them, some of these people who may struggle, who may not be able to talk at the moment, maybe non-verbals, may have quite big sensory challenges. Some of them are actually the happiest people I know, because I know one young person in particular who's really worry-free and he's really, really happy, even if he isn't able to talk at the moment. So for me, it's interesting how in this world, your sort of people judge how successful you are based on whether you have a job and you get a good education and that sort of stuff, when actually there are autistic people who may never achieve that, but they can also be really, really happy. So yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective flip. I don't know.
I mean,
that's a good point. A perspective.
Yeah.
It's mainly during your childhood, isn't it? Because you do end eventually being able to talk, don't you, when you're not verbal, usually.
There's a lot of autistic people who don't ever talk, so no.
No.
I think a very good advantage of what a non-verbal autistic could do is, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Deej.
Don't know it.
It's a very good movie. I can link it in chat, but it's a very good movie. It's about it's not a movie, it's a film. It's about an autistic who goes by the name Deej, which is what they like to be called. It's DJ, actually, but how they like to be called is DEEG or DEEJ. They're nonverbal and they're succeeding. They're a poet. It's a very very good film. I say it's if like for autistics and neurotypicals, it's a very it widens your perspective.
Yeah, cool, thank you. If you send a link, I'll put it in the description of the video so people can go and watch it.
I'll link it right now. It's not free, but it's you can rent it.
Yeah, cool. And just another discussion point, because Ethan mentioned severe autism. I was wondering what people's thoughts are on that sort of terms like that being used. There's a really interesting quote which I heard where, well, a lot of autistic people are against the sort of terms mild and severe autism and low and high functioning being used. Reason for that is people say if you call someone low functioning autistic, you're sort of hiding the strengths that they have, and if you call someone high functioning, you're hiding the challenges that they face. And I think at the moment, especially if someone's seen as sort of high functioning, then they're expected to sort of fit into society and don't get any support, even if they have things they really, really struggle with. I mean, if you called low functioning, then people automatically assume that you don't understand what anyone's saying to you, or you're stupid and all that sort of stuff. And an interesting example of this is I'm a PA for someone who's 10 years old and non-verbal, so we go out and do activities and stuff quite a lot. Because he's non-verbal, people assume he's severely autistic, and because people assume that, they assume that he doesn't understand what people are saying to him, when actually I know from when we've been out and doing things that he understands everything that I'm saying. He just may struggle to respond to it sometimes, or maybe a bit of delay in response to it. a perfect example is he likes to sort of sprinkle paper because he gets a lot of sort of sensory input from that. And once we were at a community centre and a woman came over and said, make sure you don't make a mess with that paper. And she said, make sure he doesn't make a mess with that paper. And approximately 3 minutes later, he picked all the paper up, ran up to her and threw it in her face. And then went and sat back down. So for me, that's sort of proving that he understands what people are saying. It's just, he just struggles to respond sometimes, if that makes sense. So one way that people, I'd love to hear your thoughts if you haven't heard this perspective before, but what a lot of people say is you don't have sort of mild or severe autism, you have lots of individual traits or skills. So it could be, you know, sensory differences, it could be each individual sense, it could be your motor skills, and then and that sort of stuff. I mean, you can have a sort of, you can be a high or low level for each of those individual things, if that makes sense. Like, for example, for him as an individual, he may have had low expressive language skills because he isn't able to talk at the moment. But then he'll have high receptive language skills because he understands everything that's being said to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Great way to word it.
Yeah, cool. I just thought I'd mention that. Cool. Has everyone answered that question? Yeah, I think everyone has.
What was the question again?
Is autism a disability? Yeah, I think everyone has.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So my next question for everyone, if it's okay, is do you have any autistic role models, or is there anyone you were really surprised about when you found out they were autistic?
Not for me. Not any, like, I think I do have, like, strong autistic role models in, say, you, Andy, but I haven't really had anyone who I'm surprised to learn they're autistic.
Cool.
That's not something that I have, that I've never, like, that's not something I've ever really been surprised about.
Cool.
I have what I sometimes call an autdar. It's, I can usually tell if someone's autistic or not, whether they know it or not, or whether it's a diagnosis or not.
Cool. So it's interesting. So when we did the Spectrum Gaming survey and we said about autistic role models, a lot of people put me. But the interesting thing is, I don't know. I think it's quite an interesting thing because for me, all I do is openly talk about autism, so I'm not afraid of talking about it. Do you think the reason so many people put me when I don't think I've done anything in particularly special is just that in society no one really talks about autism openly? So I'm sure there are lots of autistic people, but just because no one talks about it that much, you don't realise how many autistic people there are. Do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Like, being open about, like, I can see why a lot of people think of you as a role model. You're the leader of Spectrum Gaming. You're a good example of how an autistic should be free, not restricted by society's norms. And, I mean, we're, again, still restricted, but less restricted, right? You're still more free. You're accepting yourself for who you are.
I think also another thing is it's not just being open about autism, but you've also helped to, like, create a community for people who are autistic and help support people. So I think that's a big part of it too.
Yeah. I was trying to say that, but again, there's one thing with me. I sometimes have a hard time finding words. Yeah. So there's stuff I want to say, but gets cut out because I have a hard time finding words.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. So please feel free to not mention me and mention someone else instead. So does anyone else have any autistic role models they'd like to share?
I mean, my mum thinks they are, but this YouTuber called Coop772, Ark may know who he is. Well, definitely will. He reviews Nerf blasters, like, heavily. Like, he has to fire them 400 and something times, or about 1,000 times. He mods them a lot. He also likes to do his little calculations of the averages of them. But if he isn't, there's also, I mean, Dan Aykroyd's kind of in the middle with me. because he shows that autistic people can get like quite a good job in, say, acting, because Ghostbusters is quite a well-known franchise, and he was in the first two as a main character, and then he was in the 2016 version as that cab driver at one point. So
Cool.
he's in the middle for me.
Thank you. So Ollie, what about you? Do you have any autistic role models, do you think?
No, I can't say I have, to be honest. I think I don't really know too many autistic people like in the public view. So I wouldn't really say I have any specific autistic role models.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Most autistics I know are around my age.
Cool. And Skully, what about you?
So what's the question?
Do you have any autistic role models, or is there anyone you was really surprised is autistic when you found out?
I don't have an autistic role model, but my cousin, I was surprised when I found out she was autistic.
Yeah. Cool. So why were you surprised when you found out about your cousin?
Because at the time I wasn't autistic. Well, at the time I didn't know I was autistic, but at the time, as I was small, I thought that autistic was like really bad for you. Like, if you're autistic, it can mean like you're gonna have some mental disorder. And she acted really normal. And when I found out she had autism, and I just got surprised about it.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. So look at what some of the members from Spectrum Gaming said. So Skeleton Boy said, Ash from Pokemon, Ash Ketchum. He said the reason for this is Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, is autistic, and apparently Ash is supposed to be based on him. I didn't actually know it was supposed to be based on him, but I knew he was autistic.
I have never heard of anything like that. Not really.
Sorry. I think the reason was because Ash's Japanese name is also Satoshi. So maybe that's why. Because he's called Satoshi, but then Ash's Japanese name is Satoshi. And Satoshi Tajiri is also Japanese.
Yeah, cool. So After Birdo said, Anne Hegarty, Andy, and my mother, because when I see them doing their thing, they're confident and they're respected quite a lot. That's quite an interesting one. Jamie said, although undiagnosed, I suspect Elon Musk is autistic. He's been a huge inspiration to me. Aaron said, the football player Messi. I think people believe that Messi was diagnosed when he was 8 years old, but I'm not sure how true that is. And General Kenobi said Chris Bonello, the creator of Autistic Not Weird, and he also has the amazing book Underdogs, which is a book about some kids who are in a special needs school who save the world. So that is brilliant. I highly recommend checking it out if you can. Yeah.
You send me a link in the chat to this once this is done. I forgot to talk.
Well, I've also got a signed copy of the first book at my house. And I'm on the supporters list on the first page. Yeah, that's my claim to fame. Yeah, cool. I think we've actually covered. What's that?
If we're autistic and very like autistic positive books, there's one that's really worth mentioning that I read a while ago.
Yeah,
it's called Neurotribes.
Called
Neurotribes.
Cool. Yeah, so what do you like about Neurotribes?
It's just a very good history. It starts out on again, it's still from a neurotypical point of view, but it covers the history of autistics, and it's generally pretty autistic positive. Again, the language even at the end's a bit off, but it's still like you just see the leaps and bounds that autistic positive things have made over the last century.
Yeah, cool. I think one of my favourite things about the book Neurotribes is from when people say vaccines cause autism, but the first vaccine ever was created in 1796, and Neurotribes goes back to some of the first people that were believed were autistic. Then there's Henry Cavendish, who was born in 1731. He was a scientist.
I was about to. Yeah. I was about to mention Henry Cavendish. He's probably the most well-known example that nobody knew was autistic. In fact, the book I read before reading Neurotribes covered had a whole chapter on Henry Cavendish, not because of autistic. They didn't even mention that, but just about the important part he played in science.
Yeah.
There's actually just a lot of things that's so profoundly autistic about Henry Cavendish.
My favourite thing about it is, I think it was one of the maids in his house once, so he went to go down the stairs
Yeah,
at the exact same time, and maid tried to go
and
upstairs.
they crossed, and then he actually had a separate staircase built for them,
Yeah,
so that
exactly.
he wouldn't have to run into anybody again.
Yeah, because if our situation is so awkward, he wanted to make sure it never happened again.
And how he used to go like walking on the streets, like just go out for a walk, and then some fangirls or like fans of him try to go and say hi, and they'd wait for him every time so that they could say hi.
Yeah.
But let's just say he didn't. Again, this is very antisocial, and well, let's just say that he shifted his walk times at the exact same time every day. He shifted his walk times to just after 1 a.m.
Yeah. Cool. Nice. So we've got one more question for everyone before we wrap it up for today, which is, if you want everyone to know one thing about autism moving forward, what would it be? Does anyone in particular want to go first?
Yeah, I got
Yeah?
an idea. So I think a lot of the big misconception is that it is a sort of, it mentally represses you. It's sort of believed that it sort of reduces your intelligence, and I think that's a big misconception. I think that's definitely not true in any way. I think the misconception like originated is when the phrase autism was first coined. It was in talking about like severe forms of schizophrenia, which is like not being able to understand reality. Whereas I think autistic people are very, very easily able to understand reality. Yeah, but it's sort of believed that they are not able to understand things as well as neurotypical.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I think even in non-verbal autistic people, there's lots of people who have learnt to openly communicate on iPads or other methods, and people have said it feels like your brain's sort of trapped on the inside, if that makes sense. So their brain is fully intact and they understand absolutely everything everyone's saying to them, but just because of their sensory differences or motor differences, they're unable to prove that they understand. So yeah, I think just assuming that people do actually understand what you're saying and not talking to them like a baby is a very good point that a lot of people mention. Cool. So Ethan, what about you?
I mean, I think maybe you shouldn't patronize people that are autistic, because then they'll just end up feeling worse. Like, say you start talking slowly to them, like this, and you start trying to use simple words, because that might be how you were taught how to do it, like in training. But then, or you just might be an absolute idiot, and you know, that's usually what teenagers are like. But then that's just not very nice for them, because then they feel like they're being talked down to and that they're not important enough to. Yeah. And then that could actually lead to self-confidence issues, maybe, and that maybe they are not good enough. I don't know if I'm overanalyzing this. I don't know, but that's just what I think.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, because people have this prescriptive description of what autism is and these one-size-fits-all strategies of using simple language or being patronising and all these other things, when actually every individual prefers different things, and most autistic people say they hate being patronised and taught and being taught to in that way. So it's interesting to think about who actually came up with that as a useful suggestion. But yeah. So Skully, what about you? I don't think he's here. So Arkaiid, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah. FaZe said I'm just going to be AFK.
Okay.
But there's one thought, and that is like one misconception that'd be very important to be cleared up about autism, and is that autism is not a disease. It's not like a sickness. It's not a disease. It's not something that needs to be cured. It's not something that needs to be eradicated. It's a brain type. It's a way of thinking.
Yeah, cool. I think that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Yeah.
Cool.
Any final thoughts from anyone?
Not
we
me,
just-
but I think Faith is typing, so Faith might be back.
Cool.
Can we just
Are you back, FaZe?
Right, hello? Yes, hello.
So, last question for you, Ben. If there's one thing you want people to know about autism, what would it be, if you've got one?
Do not bully anyone if they have autism, because I think it's a bit of a superpower, to be honest.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
I think I'd also say one other thing is saying that you're in support of autistic people does not mean that you're supporting autistic people. And if you're discouraging autistic behaviors, even if you don't know you're doing it, that's still not supporting autistic people. And just because you say, "Oh, I love autistic people," doesn't mean that you're actually in support of them.
Yeah.
Same thing with Autism Speaks, like in a lot of stores. There's like support people with autism, support sick kids in hospitals with autism. That's not supporting people with autism. That's just harming them, actually.
Let's not talk about how bad Autism Speaks is. We can have a long rant about that another time.
I'm sure that that'll be an episode on its own.
a whole episode?
Yeah.
Autism
Yeah.
Speaks.
Anyway, we'll leave it there, Ben. It's been very nice to see everyone. Thank you very much for coming. And the audience, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time. So yeah, bye-bye.